There are stories that begin with roaring applause, others with a quiet breath. The story of Giannis Antetokounmpo begins not with lights, but with shadows, long shadows cast over narrow streets in Sepolia, a neighborhood in Athens where opportunity seemed like a distant echo, and dreams were luxuries few could afford. But within the walls of a modest apartment, held together more by love than by bricks, a woman named Veronica carried a universe on her back. And in her arms, a boy who would one day move the world. Before Giannis became the Greek freak, before he soared above defenders and lifted trophies, before the arenas and cameras and chants, he was just a child with no papers and too many responsibilities. The son of Nigerian immigrants who came to Greece in search of survival, not stardom. Their life was defined by scarcity, of food, of certainty, of rights. They had no legal status, no safety net, but they had each other. And they had a mother whose strength couldn't be measured in words. Veronica was more than a mother. She was the roof, the warmth, the silence that turned into comfort, the thunder when discipline was needed. She had left her own dreams behind in Nigeria to give her children the ghost of a chance. And every morning, while Athens was still wiping the sleep from its eyes, she was up, preparing what little food there was, blessing her sons before they scattered to sell trinkets on the street. Giannis, tall for his age and gentle in spirit, stood out even then. Not because of basketball, he hadn't touched a real ball yet, but because of how he moved. There was urgency in him, even as a child. He ran not just to move faster, but as if he was running towards something he couldn't name. Each sale he made on the street wasn't just about the money. It was a small victory against the silence of being invisible. And yet, even in those early years, there was a spark in him that didn't quite belong to the streets. Sometimes, after hours of walking and negotiating with strangers who barely saw him, Giannis would come home and collapse on the bed he shared with his brothers. They were often hungry, often cold, but they were never hopeless. Veronica made sure of that. She spoke to them not just as children, but as future kings. She reminded them over and over, "We are not what they see. We are who God knows us to be." And in those nights, Giannis began to believe. When he was about 12, everything changed. A local coach, Spiros Veliniatis, saw him playing football barefoot on a dusty lot and noticed his movement. Fluid, instinctive, relentless. Spiros offered him a chance to try basketball. Giannis had no idea what to do with a basketball, but he had something more important, an eagerness to learn and a will that frightened people. That will, he would later say, came from watching his mother. She never gave up, he told an interviewer years later. Even when we had nothing, she kept walking. I thought, if she can do that, what excuse do I have? There's something sacred about watching a dream being born in silence. Giannis didn't have shoes at first. He and his brother Thanasis shared one pair during practice, switching in and out of drills. He would run to the court, practice until dark, then run home and help his parents with whatever needed to be done. No complaints, just movement, just that same urgency that he couldn't yet define. He wasn't thinking about the NBA. He didn't even know what the NBA really was. His dream then was smaller but heavier, to make enough money so his mother didn't have to clean strangers' houses or work jobs that crushed her hands. He wanted to put real food on the table. To buy her a bed she could actually stretch her legs on. The kind of dream that isn't loud, but changes everything. And as Giannis grew, so did his hunger. Not just for the game, but for responsibility. He saw how tired his parents were. He saw how hard it was for them to smile some days. And every time he stepped on the court, he played as if that ball was the key to a new life, as if each layup would translate to another day of rent. It wasn't a game, it was survival. But even in that survival, something beautiful began to bloom. Coaches took notice. Scouts whispered his name. He was lanky, raw, unpolished, but there was something in his stride, in his eyes, in the way he chased rebounds like they owed him money. He was a storm in slow motion, still gathering force, and always at the edge of the court was Veronica, watching, praying, not for trophies, but for the strength to keep him humble, for protection from the noise of a world that chews boys like him up. There's a photo, taken before the world knew who he was, of Giannis standing beside his mother, holding her hand after a local game. They're both looking at the camera, unsmiling. Not because they weren't happy, but because that moment wasn't for show. It was survival again. And maybe, just maybe, the first step towards something they could almost touch. What people don't always understand is that Giannis wasn't made in the NBA. He was made in kitchens where his mother boiled potatoes and divided them into 4 portions. He was made on buses he ran after because he didn't have fare. He was made in the silence of a mother who cried at night but woke up every morning ready to fight again. And that's where this story must begin. Not with the championships or the parades, but with a boy watching his mother count coins by candlelight. A boy who learned early that love without stability is still enough to raise giants. A boy who, before he was a brand, was a son who carried the weight of 5 people on his back because he knew what it felt like to be carried by a woman who never let him fall. By the time Giannis turned 17, the buzz around him was real. NBA scouts were calling. Coaches were coming to watch him play. But even then, he hesitated. Not because he wasn't ready, but because he didn't want to leave her behind. "If I go," he once said to a friend, "what happens to my family?" That question wasn't rhetorical. It was a confession. Because for Giannis, every step forward meant looking back, to make sure they were coming with him. When he finally signed his contract with the Milwaukee Bucks, there were no fireworks in the Antetokounmpo household, just quiet and gratitude and the beginning of a plan. Giannis didn't celebrate like a star. He smiled like a worker who finally got a chance to clock in at a better job, and his first instinct wasn't to spend, it was to secure, to lift, to protect the woman who had held everything together for so long. And Veronica, still quiet, still composed, simply looked at him and said, "I told you. One day it would all be worth it." That was the beginning of the next chapter. But before we turn that page, we have to sit in this moment a little longer. In the 1-bedroom apartment, on the cracked court in Sepolia, in the silence of a mother's faith. Because that's where greatness is born, not under the lights, but in the dark, when no one is watching, and you choose to believe anyway. When Giannis landed in America, the sky felt too big, the streets too wide, and the silence too loud. He stepped off the plane in Milwaukee with a suitcase half empty and a heart so full it nearly burst through his chest. The boy who had run barefoot through Sepolia was now thousands of miles from home, in a place where no one knew his name, and even fewer could pronounce it. His family wasn't with him, not yet, and every corner of this new life felt like a test. Cold air stung his skin. Fast food tasted strange. The language danced around him like a code he couldn't crack. But still, he smiled. Because he knew why he was here. Because he knew who was waiting on the other end of the phone. In his first months in Milwaukee, Giannis sent back almost every dollar he earned. He kept little for himself, barely enough for food, sometimes walking miles just to save on bus fare. His teammates remember seeing him run to the arena, not for training, but simply because he had no car and refused to spend money on a taxi. When they asked him why he didn't just buy something to eat, he said, "My family needs it more." There was no hesitation, no resentment, just focus, just purpose. For Giannis, sacrifice wasn't a burden. It was a language he had been speaking his entire life. He spent his early days trying to adjust, on the court, off the court, in his mind. The NBA was a different world. The game was faster, the players stronger, the expectations enormous. Coaches saw glimpses of brilliance, long limbs, explosive speed, an unteachable hunger, but they also saw how raw he was. He wasn't polished. He didn't come from a basketball factory or an elite academy. He came from hustle, from instinct, from survival. And in that chaos, he began to build something that couldn't be measured in stats. He trained like his life depended on it, because in some ways, it did. Early mornings, late nights, film sessions, drills, lifting, running, learning. His body began to change, filling out with strength and resilience. He studied the greats, not just how they moved, but how they thought. Kobe, LeBron, Duncan. He listened. He asked questions. He absorbed it all. But always he carried his own voice, soft, measured, steady. The voice of a kid still writing letters to his mom in his head. There were hard days, nights when he couldn't sleep, times when the loneliness wrapped around him like a second skin. He missed home. He missed Greek bread and his brother's jokes and the sound of his mother humming while she cooked. He missed a language he didn't have to translate in his head. And sometimes, just for a moment, he would close his eyes and wish it all away. The cameras, the noise, the pressure. But then he would remember that back in Athens, his mother was still working, his brothers were still struggling, and that was enough to pull him out of whatever fog he found himself in. In one of his first major interviews, Giannis was asked what he would buy with his first big check. The reporter expected something typical: cars, watches, sneakers. But Giannis looked down, smiled gently and said, "A home for my mom." And when that check came, that's exactly what he did. Before the headlines, before the awards. He found a house, he moved them in, and only then did he feel like he could breathe. Milwaukee in time became more than a place. It became a second home. The fans, drawn to his humility, adopted him quickly. They saw the fire in him, the awkward grace that turned into dominance. The boy who would sprint full court for a block, then sprint back just as hard for a layup. There was something different about him, something that couldn't be coached. And as he grew, the world began to notice. Each season brought a new version of Giannis, stronger, smarter, more confident. He added moves to his arsenal, jump hooks, euro steps, fadeaways. But what never changed was the way he looked after every play. Like a kid still surprised to be here, still grateful. Even when he dunked with violence, his face afterward was quiet, reflective, as if asking himself, "Did you see that, Mom?" Then came the accolades: Most Improved Player, All-Star, MVP, then MVP again. And in every speech his voice cracked when he mentioned his mother. He didn't thank agents or entourages, he thanked her. He spoke about sleeping in one room with his brothers, about selling watches, about how she walked with dignity when they had nothing. And every time the room grew still, not because he was a superstar, but because he reminded everyone what it meant to be human. But the road wasn't smooth. There were playoff failures, harsh critiques, pundits who said he couldn't shoot, that he couldn't win in the modern NBA, that he was just athleticism without skill. Giannis heard it all, and he didn't respond with tweets or interviews. He responded with work, with hours in the gym, with sweat that spoke louder than words. And behind him always the voice of his mother, "Don't stop now, you're not finished." He brought his family to Milwaukee, not just physically, but emotionally. They became part of the journey. His brothers played in the NBA. His father's passing in 2017 broke something in him, but also solidified his purpose. "He's watching," Giannis would say. "I have to make him proud." And in his mother's quiet strength, he found a reason to keep going. When the Bucks finally won the NBA championship in 2021, the moment felt biblical. Giannis dropped 50 points in the closeout game, 50, as if the universe wanted a number to match the years of struggle, the silent sacrifices, the late nights on cold floors. He stood on that podium, trophy in one hand, tears in his eyes, and said, "This is for my mom, this is for my family, we made it." He wasn't just celebrating a title, he was celebrating survival, transcendence, proof that love, when nurtured with sacrifice, can become a bridge between the impossible and the real. And when the confetti fell and the cameras zoomed in, there she was, Veronica, hugging him, whispering something only he could hear. And in his eyes, you could see the boy from Sepolia, still there, still running, still chasing something bigger than himself. Giannis never forgot, not the streets, not the struggle, not the woman who gave everything so he could have a shot. And though the world now saw him as a global icon, an MVP, a champion, he still saw himself as a son first, a protector, a promise fulfilled. He had homes now, businesses, endorsements, a family of his own. But every night, before he sleeps, he still thinks of that apartment in Greece, of his mother counting coins, of the smell of boiled potatoes, of the sound of footsteps returning late from work. And that's what defines him. Not just what he's built, but how he built it. With reverence, with memory, with a heart that never hardened, even when the world tried to toughen him up. Giannis plays with joy, with fury, with grace, but he lives with gratitude. And at the center of that life, there is a woman whose name few can pronounce, but whose impact is etched in every chapter of his journey. Block 2 doesn't end with a ring. It ends with a quiet dinner, shared in a warm kitchen where no cameras are allowed. Giannis, sitting beside his mother, passing her a plate, smiling. Not as the MVP, not as the Greek freak, but as her son. The boy who once wrote her a letter and never had the courage to give it, the letter that soon she would find. And when she read it aloud, the world would finally understand what he had been carrying all along. There are moments that don't come with fanfare. They arrive quietly, like a breeze brushing against your skin, unnoticed by most, until they stop you cold. It wasn't a game night. There were no cameras, no commentators. Just a room filled with people who had come not to watch Giannis play, but to understand the heart that beat beneath the jersey. A charity gala, hosted by the Antetokounmpo family, raising funds for underprivileged youth in Greece and Milwaukee. That night, the goal was to give back, to remember, to honor where they came from. And in the soft lighting of the banquet hall, as the evening drew toward its close, a microphone was passed gently to a woman who rarely asked to speak. Veronica Antetokounmpo took the stage slowly, hands clasped in front of her. She was calm, composed, yet carried a kind of gravity that pulled the air taut. She had spoken at events before, but never like this. Tonight was different. Something in her eyes gave it away, a glimmer, maybe a tremble, the kind of look a mother wears when she's about to share something sacred. The room fell silent, phones lowered, conversations paused. Even Giannis, seated with his brothers, straightened in his chair. Veronica looked out into the room, then down at the paper she held delicately in her hands, creased, yellowed slightly at the edges, as if it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. It had. She took a breath, the kind of breath you take before speaking truth, and then she began. "There is a letter," she said softly, "that my son wrote many years ago. He never gave it to me. I found it hidden in a drawer in our old apartment in Cipolla. He must have written it before he left for America. I never read it, until recently." She paused. You could hear the breath catch in the room. Giannis lowered his head slightly, a hand covering his mouth, eyes wide with something between surprise and recognition. She continued, "I debated whether I should read it. It was meant to be private, I think. But tonight I feel it is meant to be shared, not because it's about him, but because it's about what love can do." Her voice held firm, though her fingers trembled. She unfolded the letter carefully. The room was still, the kind of stillness usually reserved for prayer. She began to read. "Mama, if you are reading this, it means I was too afraid to give it to you before I left. Maybe I thought it was silly. Maybe I didn't want you to cry, but I need you to know these words have been living in me. Since the day I first held a basketball, I owe everything to you. Every moment, every lesson, every second I have ever stood up straight in this world was because I saw you carry us when we had nothing. I remember the nights you went without food, just so we could eat. I remember how you folded your dreams and hid them in the laundry so we could chase ours. You never complained. You never asked for thanks. But I saw you, Mama, every day, and I never forgot. They tell me I have talent, that I'm special, but all I ever wanted was to be the kind of strong you are, the kind of brave that doesn't need to shout, the kind of love that shows up even when it's tired. That's what you are to me, not just my mother. You are my home. If I make it in America, I promise I will bring you there. I will buy you a house where you don't have to clean for strangers. I will fill the fridge. I will buy you a bed so soft it feels like you're floating. I will take care of you the way you took care of us. And if I don't make it, if I fail, if I come back with nothing, I will still be proud, because I tried for you, because I left for you, because I wanted to show the world the power of your love. Thank you, Mama, for teaching me how to be a man before the world ever knew my name. Your son, Giannis." Veronica's voice faded on the last line, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. The room had gone utterly still. Some guests wept silently. Others sat with hands pressed to their hearts. Even the waitstaff paused in place. It was as if time itself had stopped to let those words echo through the walls. Giannis sat frozen, eyes wet, his mouth slightly open. He hadn't remembered writing the letter in such detail. He had written it quickly on a restless night, full of fear and dreams and desperation. He never meant to give it to her. It felt too raw, too vulnerable, but somehow she had found it. And she had kept it, held onto it like a thread connecting the boy he was to the man he became. He stood up slowly and walked toward the stage. The room parted like water around him. When he reached his mother, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. He wrapped his arms around her, and for a long, long time they just stood there, mother and son, past and present, struggle and triumph, folded into one embrace. It wasn't about basketball anymore. It never really had been. The applause came only after they stepped away from the microphone. It wasn't the loud kind, the kind that tries to impress. It was soft, honest, the kind that grows from the chest, from gratitude, from being reminded that even in a world spinning fast, some things remain unshakable, like a mother's love. That night, no trophy was lifted, no stat line read. But Giannis gave the world something rarer than a championship. He gave them a glimpse into his soul. He let them see the boy behind the muscles, the man who still carried a quiet letter in his memory, the son who knew exactly what had built him. Later, someone would ask him what it felt like to hear the letter read aloud. He paused before answering, then said, "It felt like coming home." Because that's what the letter was. A home, built not of walls or wealth, but of words and love. A reminder that greatness doesn't begin in stadiums. It begins in kitchens, in whispered prayers, in sacrifices made without applause. That real strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a woman ironing clothes after midnight, humming softly so her children can sleep. And so the story ends not on a court, but in the space between hearts, between a mother who gave everything and a son who never forgot. In a letter, once hidden, now shared. In a truth that doesn't fade with fame, that before Giannis was a champion, he was a child who believed he could become one, because his mother did first. And that belief, that silent, unshakable faith, it changed everything.